What's up everybody, I'm Paul and welcome to my channel. So in one of my recent videos I talked about why my e-commerce business failed, and while I covered lots of things in that video, there were certain things and certain mistakes I made through running my e-commerce business that I decided to set aside for a separate video, and that's what this video is all about. So in this video I'm going to cover the 5 biggest mistakes I made while running my e-commerce business. But before I get into the video, if anybody's wondering why I sound a little bit different or potentially a little bit nasally in this video, I'm really suffering with hay fever at the moment, so I'm all bunged up, I've got itchy eyes, itchy throat. It's absolutely fantastic and I'm loving every minute of it. And it's really not what I want to feel like when I'm about to sit down and record a video, but I'm going to soldier on through and record this video anyway. So with the introduction out of the way, let's jump into the 5 biggest mistakes I made while running my e-commerce business. So the first big mistake I made for my e-commerce business was I changed business names, and thus I changed domain names. And while doing this once is a big upheaval for any business, I did this a total of 3 times, and honestly it really wasn't worth it, and in the end I actually ended up reverting back to the original business name and domain name that I actually started my e-commerce business with. So I went through all that hassle and upheaval and ended up exactly where I started. It really wasn't worth it. But there's also lots of negative impacts of changing business name and domain names. The first one is when you change your business name, you kind of lose all that reputation and goodwill and all that good feedback you've built up on that original business name. So what I started with, I lost all that when I changed my business name. And when it comes to your websites, when you change to a new domain name, you lose any authority you've built up on that website. So any kind of backlinks or things like that are stuck with that original domain name, and they don't really transfer across to your new domain name. Even if you do things like 301 redirects, it's still a brand new domain and you're basically starting from scratch all over again. And I did this multiple times, and honestly it wasn't worth the hassle. Plus, along with also changing your business name and domain name, you also have to change everything behind the scenes. So all things like your banking details, your tax details, there's so many things you need to change, and honestly it's just not worth it. Now, unless you've managed to really badly damage your business's reputation and your name is absolutely trash, honestly don't bother going through this. It's just not worth it. Stick with your original name if you're happy with it. And for me personally, what I realized was, looking back in hindsight, which obviously is 2020, all the actual business names that I come up with would have worked far better for my business as collections, because I was selling jewelry, to come up with collections based around these names rather than changing the complete business name over. It would have just saved me so much hassle and so much time, and I could have just focused on my business. Also, another thing with changing domain names is you lose that authority, as I've already mentioned. But what would have happened if I'd stuck with the original domain name was I would have had that for 6-7 years now, and it would have been an aged domain with content on it, and it would have generated some backlinks and authority, and it would have been a much more valuable domain name than what it is currently. So honestly, unless you really need to, don't change business names, because it's just not worth the hassle. So the second biggest mistake I made while running my e-commerce business was I kept moving e-commerce platforms. And this was something I did a lot, especially in the early days, because I didn't understand how websites actually worked and how long it takes to actually start seeing any kind of success with a website. I was kind of comparing it directly to what it was like to sell on online marketplaces like eBay, where you can get traction and start getting sales pretty quickly. I expected that to happen with my e-commerce website, and it just simply doesn't happen like that, especially when you're trying to get organic traffic. It takes a while to start ranking in search engines, but I didn't understand this at the time. Also, I wasn't doing any kind of social media marketing either, so I wasn't getting any traction with my website. And I kept thinking that if I moved from one platform to another, one of them would be like a magic bullet and all of a sudden I'd start getting traffic and sales. As I say, I didn't understand how websites worked. And this is something I have talked about on this channel before, is unless you really need to move platform, don't. This is because whenever you do move e-commerce platform, you're basically setting your website back a few steps, because you're going to have to submit a new sitemap to search engines, and they're going to have to start indexing your site from scratch. And say this sets your website back a few steps. So unless you really need to, don't move e-commerce platforms. Find one that you like using. I know it's hard when you're just setting up an e-commerce website, but find the one that you like using the most and then stick with it. Have like a 2-year plan for that website that you're going to stick through it. Set some money aside for your budget and make sure you stick with that one platform to see if you get any traction with your website. That is one of the big things I would recommend, is sticking with the platform. Don't keep moving like I did, because say you just set your website back a few steps. And it wasn't until I actually like stuck with WooCommerce that I started seeing any kind of traction with my e-commerce website. So hopefully that is a good tip for you. And the third big mistake I made with my e-commerce business was I focused too much on my online marketplaces, mainly eBay, rather than focusing on my own website. And as I mentioned in the Why My E-commerce Business Failed video, I basically got to a split in the road. I could focus on eBay or I could have focused on my own website. And I decided to go with eBay, and that was a really silly decision and something I do regret a lot to this day, because my website was starting to get traffic and it was starting to get sales, and these were organic sales, which is kind of like the holy grail of e-commerce sales, and I was starting to get there. And if I'd gone in all on my website and I'd started to grow that out, really focused on it, I probably wouldn't be sat here now recording videos, because I probably still would be running my e-commerce business, because if it had carried on to grow the way it was, it would have turned into something pretty awesome. But alas, I focused on eBay, which didn't work out in the long run, rather than focusing on my website. And that's one of the reasons why I do mention this a lot on this channel, is your website should be the main focus of your e-commerce business. Yes, online sales channels are great. Things like marketplaces, social media, things like that are fantastic, but they are sales channels. They shouldn't be the core of your business. That should be your website, because it's your domain, it's your website, and it's what you have the most control over. So you dictate things like the marketing and you dictate the direction of the website. So that should be the main focus of your e-commerce business, is getting sales and customers onto your e-commerce website, rather than focusing on marketplaces such as eBay or Amazon. So next up is mistake number 4, which was making really bad product decisions. Now, in the first few years of my business, I'd done lots of research and I looked at the data to make the choice on what kind of products I was going to sell. And I actually started to carve out a pretty good niche for myself. But when things started to take a little bit of a turn for the worst, I actually started making gut-based decisions on products that I thought was going to sell. But I had no information or data to back this up. And when I invested a good chunk of change in these products and they didn't sell, it left me in a really bad position, because I had all this money tied up in stock that it didn't sell. I didn't have the kind of audience built up for that. So basically, this was just a waste of time and money. Rather than focusing on what I knew did work and expanding those product ranges and investing heavily in those and growing that, so that was the core product line of my business, I ended up going completely off track, making really bad product decisions, and ultimately this investment didn't pay off and it affected my business a lot in the long run. So when you are making product-based decisions, make sure you do lots of research and try and establish that there is a market for it and people are selling these products, and see if you can go in and do anything different. And while gut-based decisions can work in certain circumstances, it's much better to go with data and research-driven approach, so you actually have a more of a guesstimate about the product rather than just thinking it's going to work. So always do the research and try and establish that there is a market for those products, and there is an audience out there that are prepared to buy those products as well. And also, how are you going to get that product in front of that audience? So make sure that your product decisions are always driven by data rather than just a gut feeling. So the fifth and final mistake I made in my e-commerce business was I didn't learn how to do proper social media marketing. And this was one of the reasons why my business ultimately failed, because I wasn't harnessing the power of social media to generate traffic to my site and also generate sales. Whether this was organic growth or using ads, I never properly learned how to do any of it. And social media marketing is a huge component of any e-commerce business's marketing strategy. And this is really evident now, but in 2015, there was much more opportunities out there, because even though there was competition, there was nowhere near as much competition as there is now. And also back then, your posts generally reached a larger audience. On things like Instagram, you'd get far more engagement back in like 2015, 2016 than what you do with posts now, because basically Instagram and Facebook are limiting the exposure of the post to try and get you to buy ads, whereas back then there was a much larger reach and you could reach much more people. So I didn't harness the power of social media, and that was one of the contributing factors to why my e-commerce business failed. And it's one of the things I do look back on and I get really frustrated with myself, because I could see the potential of social media and how it could have benefited my business, but I just didn't invest the time to learn how to do it properly to benefit my business, which did hurt my business in the long run, and why as I say, I'm a YouTuber now rather than running an e-commerce business. So those are the 5 biggest mistakes I made in my e-commerce business, and hopefully they've been helpful to you and given you a bit of insight into things that you shouldn't do if you was considering doing them, or things that you want to avoid when running your e-commerce business. So hopefully you turn out to be much more successful in the world of e-commerce than I was. So thank you so much for watching, guys. If you found this video helpful, please drop a like on the video. Also, if you'd like to support the channel, you can do by buying me a coffee using the link in the description, and that is very, very much appreciated. So once again, guys, thank you so much for watching. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.